The Starliner saga continues. Is Boeing overconfident as much as NASA is risk-averse? The story of Boeing's Starliner and its astronaut crew, Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams, is an indefinite extension of the crew flight test mission. The astronauts successfully docked with the International Space Station, ISS, on June 5, 2024, but were unable to return due to an issue with a helium leak and overheating thrusters that shut down before docking. This required the astronauts to assume manual control of a spacecraft that was supposed to be fully automated. This was disappointing for Boeing and NASA, but it was not a disaster because the Starliner was built with the option of manual control, and the astronauts are well trained to fly spacecraft manually. The incident exposed additional concerns between NASA and Boeing about the spacecraft's reliability and acceptable risk of return, which NASA plans to address in an anticipated update on August 14, 2024, the 70th day of the mission. After spending the last 2 months identifying and testing thruster issues that occurred during the docking phase with ISS, Boeing has publicly stated that the issues with Starliner do not pose a risk to the spacecraft or the crew. Boeing's confidence in Starliner's ability to return safely is not fully unfounded, because NASA has confirmed that Starliner is available if there is a need for an immediate need to return to Earth. NASA also worked closely with Boeing to identify thruster issues' root cause and has publicly expressed the validity of the findings. Unintentionally, Boeing has demonstrated that its backup, manual flight control options, redundancy, multiple thrusters, and 10 times more helium than necessary to enable it to dock with the ISS, even with these issues. Starliner has also demonstrated that its ability to successfully re-enter Earth's atmosphere and land safety in its 2 unmanned test flights of OFT and OFT-2. Boeing's reasoning for confidence is not unfounded, but the plaguing issues of both hardware and program management have created questions around Starliner's program. Boeing has publicly asserted that it can resolve the thruster issue through its ground test findings and manual flight options, while it's also implying that the Aerojet Rocketdyne, the thruster subcontractor, is to blame for not meeting Starliner requirements. NASA has also stated that an option would be that Starliner could return autonomously, just as unmanned flights of OFT and OFT-2 operated fully autonomously. NASA expected that Starliner could return autonomously if it chose not to risk the astronauts on a flight return. Given that Starliner's primary flight mode, even if when manned, is autonomous, Boeing acknowledged that the proven OFT-2 mission autonomous flight software is different than the CFT crew flight test software. Starliner can still fly autonomously, but the current software does not allow for autonomous undocking from the ISS. This implies that either a software update or a potential hardware modification are required for autonomous return, or a crewed return is required for Starliner to undock from ISS. There are now questions about whether Starliner has other issues. The problems that NASA and Boeing have identified with Starliner are most likely not enough to support the final decision that Starliner cannot successfully return to Earth. The ongoing concerns about the unknown factors, such as the helium leak and Boeing's accusations against Rocketdyne, highlight a potential lack of controls and oversight in Boeing's management of the Starliner program. NASA, Boeing's customer, must decide whether to proceed with return or remain cautious with a consideration that Boeing's issues may lead to more unexpected problems. NASA has clearly taken a cautious approach to making the final decision on the crewed return of the Starliner. In the past, people have criticized NASA for taking safety for granted, or at the very least, becoming complacent when it comes to the safety. This included the 1967 plugs-out launch pad test of Apollo 1 and the Space Shuttle Challenger launch in 1986, both of which led to fatal accidents that claimed the lives of 10 astronauts in a time where the push to meet performance expectations and deadlines created an environment where safety was unintentionally compromised to meet other priorities. Meeting performance goals and complacency contributed to the Space Shuttle Columbia re-entry accident in 2003. But the failure to prioritize safety was even more unacceptable, leading to the deaths of another 7 astronauts. Astronaut Gus Grissom, who was the commander who was killed on the Apollo 1 pad fire, is quoted as saying a few weeks before the fire, "If we die, we want people to accept it. We are in a risky business, and we hope that if anything happens to us, it will not delay the program. The conquest of space is worth the risk of life." End quote. The quote may be a paraphrase of several statements made by Lieutenant Colonel Grissom on the subject of space exploration, but undoubtedly reflects his conviction about the unacceptable risks associated with human spaceflight. Grissom, one of the early pioneers of space exploration, participated in the U.S.-USSR space race, a larger East-West ideological struggle that viewed the ultimate goal of conquering space and defeating the Soviets as less significant than the life of a single individual. Colonel Grissom's geopolitical rivalry of this time no longer exists today, but that does not mean that his words are irrelevant in light of the current issue with Starliner and the astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams. Managed risk taking is part of NASA's DNA. Making exploration is risky business in 1967, and despite the track record of Soyuz and Falcon 9, it is still risky business today. The question for NASA and its administrations is, do they have any tolerance for risk in spaceflight in today's world? NASA is in a fledgling place with the Artemis program, including the Space Launch System, Orion space capsule, and the Lunar Gateway. They apparently hold the belief that taking any risks in human exploration is, at this nascent stage, would result in the loss of public support. This could result in the cancellation or long-term delays of future Artemis plans, effectively ending those programs. A majority of people in the United States are either supportive or indifferent about the space program and will remain so as long as something does not go wrong. But if it does, the narrative and public support will completely turn against NASA. So, has NASA become too risk-averse in manned spaceflight? Perhaps we shouldn't place too much emphasis on the Starliner return delays that NASA is insisting upon for definitively answering that question. NASA is in a unique position and does not need to risk Wilmore or Williams for a quick return. It has options. At no point in the manned space program did NASA have the luxury of having so many immediately available and safer options. The Starliner crew is safely aboard the International Space Station with no concerns about the consumption of consumables or living space aboard the ISS. SpaceX, a cargo dragon, and Grumman, Cygnus, are currently available to provide resupply missions to the ISS, as well as keep the ISS fully stocked, even with a larger crew. NASA is exploring both a SpaceX Crew Dragon and the Roscosmos Soyuz as viable return options for the astronauts. NASA has ample time to assess the safety of Starliner and make software updates if decided, and if it has any concerns, it can opt for either Crew Dragon or Soyuz. If it so chooses, it can schedule these missions, keeping in mind that the least risky option for Starliner crew is the most suitable option to avoid jeopardizing the crew and its future Artemis plans. NASA can make safety paramount and not risk the future plans by taking the time to decide on Starliner, and could possibly save the Starliner program in the process. Boeing's confidence in Starliner being able to return is not unfounded, but the risk of known and unknown issues has made NASA cautious. Boeing clearly has issues that will require overhaul of the Starliner program, even if it safely returns, and since Starliner is already operating at a $1.6 billion loss, Boeing, may not be willing to maintain the program and drop out of the commercial crew program. However, if Starliner does not return safely, it will most certainly end the Starliner program. The termination of Starliner would leave NASA without a backup spacecraft, as well as the options it currently has with ISS and with SpaceX. Beyond being the right decision, Boeing and NASA have vested interest in ensuring the safe return of the crew, which will allow them to proceed with the commercial crew program and the Artemis program. Any other outcome could jeopardize them both, so it does not need to rush a decision. Compared to the past, NASA may be more risk-averse, but unlike any other time in the past, it has given itself more flexibility to avoid risky decisions that could jeopardize future programs.